On the morning of the 17th of November 1939, the German freighter SS Columbus limped into British-controlled waters off the Norwegian coast. Her captain, convinced he'd stumbled upon a routine cross-channel ferry that had strayed hopelessly off course. The vessel before him, HMS Plover, looked utterly unremarkable. Her silhouette matched dozens of passenger ferries that had shuttled civilians between Dover and Calais just months earlier. Her funnels bore the weathered paint of civilian service. Even her deck layout screamed peacetime transport. What the German captain couldn't see was that in the previous 6 hours, Plover had laid 240 Mark 14 mines in a precise geometric pattern, each one now sitting 12 feet beneath the surface, waiting. By the time the Columbus realized her mistake and turned to run, she'd already crossed the minefield twice. The explosion sent her to the bottom in under 4 minutes. This wasn't luck, this was the entire point. The Royal Navy had converted 36 cross-channel ferries and coastal steamers into minelayers between August 1939 and March 1940. Vessels so unremarkable that German naval intelligence initially catalogued them as auxiliary transports and hospital ships. By May 1940, these harmless ferries had laid 43,367 mines in defensive fields around British waters and offensive barrages across German shipping lanes. German charts marked safe passages that were, in fact, death traps. Kriegsmarine captains sailed confidently through zones they believed clear, following routes that should have been secure. The fields laid by converted ferries sank 127 German vessels in the first 9 months of the war, more than all British submarines combined during the same period. Not a single German report from 1939 correctly identified these vessels as mine layers. Not one. What looked like Britain scraping the bottom of the barrel, desperately converting civilian vessels because they lacked proper warships, was actually one of the war's most brutally effective deceptions. And it worked precisely because it looked so improvised. Standard naval thinking in 1939 held that mine-laying required purpose-built vessels with sophisticated equipment. The German Kriegsmarine operated dedicated mine-layers like the Cobra and Kaiser, ships designed from the keel up for mine warfare. These vessels featured stern launching rails with hydraulic systems that could deploy mines at precise intervals whilst maintaining 18 knots. Their bridge crews trained for years in the complex mathematics of minefield geometry. Their hulls were reinforced to handle the weight and shock of mine deployment. French naval doctrine emphasized similar principles. The Pluton-class mine layers carried elaborate plotting tables and required crews of 180 specialists. The British were converting ferries that had, 3 months earlier, been serving afternoon tea to day trippers. HMS Manxman, converted from the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company's Mona's Isle, retained her original deck saloon furniture in the officers' mess. HMS Princess Victoria still had the ticket booth from her Stranraer land service, visible beneath a hasty coat of Admiralty grey paint. These conversions happened in an average of 11 days. Purpose-built mine layers took 18 months to construct. Critics in the Admiralty, and there were many, argued this was madness. Vice Admiral Sir Reginald Henderson wrote in an October 1939 memo that converted civilian vessels lack the structural integrity, crew training and navigational precision required for effective mine warfare. We are sending men to sea in passenger boats and calling it naval strategy. He was technically correct about every criticism. He was completely wrong about the conclusion. The British conversion philosophy inverted every principle of German mine-layer design. Where the Kriegsmarine built obvious warships, the Royal Navy preserved civilian appearance. Where German vessels required 180 specialists, British conversions operated with 47 crew, most of them merchant seamen who'd served on the exact same vessels before the war. Where German mine layers needed elaborate hydraulic systems, British engineers installed a simple stern ramp and manual release mechanism that could be operated by 4 men with spanners. The technical specifications reveal the philosophy. A converted ferry like HMS Minster carried 150 Mark 14 mines on 2 parallel rails running down her main deck. Each mine weighed 1,134 pounds. The rails were literally bolted to the original deck planking. No structural reinforcement, no specialised mounting system. Release was controlled by a single rating at the stern, who operated a mechanical lever connected to retaining clips via steel cable. When the officer on the bridge rang the telegraph bell, the stern rating pulled the lever, a clip released, and a mine rolled off the stern ramp. Timing was managed by the simple expedient of a stopwatch and a man counting seconds aloud. At 12 knots, the cruising speed of most conversions, mines deployed at 72-yard intervals, creating a standard pattern 400 yards wide. The entire system could be operated in absolute radio silence with only visual signals from the bridge. German minelayers, by contrast, required constant communication between bridge, plotting room, and stern crews. Their hydraulic systems needed functioning electrical systems. Their precise deployment required stable speeds above 16 knots. The British system would work if the ferry's engines were half broken, if electrical systems failed, if the crew were seasick merchant sailors who'd never laid a mine before. It was designed for the chaos of actual operations, not the clean conditions of peacetime exercises. The Graf Zeppelin's air reconnaissance reports from December 1939 describe observing HMS Killarney off the Dutch coast. The report classified her as likely coastal transport military passengers, based on her profile and lack of visible armament. The report noted she was proceeding at civilian speeds and showing normal running lights for neutral waters navigation. At the time of observation, Killarney was on her 9th mine-laying sortie, having already deployed 1,350 mines. She was literally laying a mine every 90 seconds whilst German observers photographed her and concluded she was harmless. What made this work wasn't just preserving civilian appearance, it was understanding the cognitive assumptions of enemy intelligence. German naval reconnaissance operated on pattern recognition. A mine layer should display certain characteristics: military bearing, escort vessels, operation in groups, high-speed transits, visible deck equipment, warship hull lines. The converted ferries deliberately showed none of these markers. British operational doctrine exploited this systematically. Converted mine layers operated individually, never in groups. They maintained precisely the speeds their civilian counterparts had used. The Isle of Man ferries ran at 11 to 12 knots, exactly as they had on peacetime routes. They showed running lights in neutral waters. They even, in several documented cases, maintained their civilian names painted over with only a thin coat of grey, visible beneath in certain light conditions. HMS Scotia, converted from the London and North Eastern Railway's passenger ferry, conducted 23 mine-laying operations between September 1939 and April 1940. German intelligence reports mention civilian ferry traffic near her operational areas 7 times. Not once was she identified as a military vessel. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander James Harrison, noted in his after-action report from January 1940, passed within 800 yards of German trawler at 0640 hours. Enemy vessel showed no reaction, continued southward, deployed mines as scheduled. The German trawler's log captured in 1945 records for that date. 0640 observed British passenger ferry heading south, likely Copenhagen route. They watched the mine layer lay mines and thought they were watching a ferry run its route. The manual release mechanism, operated by one man with a lever, seemed like the kind of desperate improvisation Britain was forced into by lack of resources. German naval engineers who examined captured British mine equipment in 1941 wrote reports expressing genuine puzzlement at the simplicity. One report notes, "Release mechanism is primitive beyond explanation. British engineering standards appear to have collapsed entirely. No hydraulics, no automated spacing, no sophisticated depth setting systems, manual labour for all functions." They interpreted poverty of design where there was actually clarity of purpose. The sophisticated German hydraulic systems required maintenance crews, spare parts, and constant electrical power. British ferries laid mines in conditions that would have disabled German vessels entirely. HMS Lochinvar completed a mine-laying operation on 3 February 1940 in force 8 winds, with her starboard engine completely failed. She limped along at 6 knots, crew manually counting intervals, and successfully deployed 94 mines in the planned pattern. The mine spacing was irregular, ranging from 45 to 110 yards instead of the standard 72, but the field was effective. 3 German vessels struck mines in that field over the following month. A German mine layer would have aborted the mission. The sophisticated equipment required stable platforms and consistent speeds. The British system worked because it was designed to work when everything else had failed. This wasn't limited to rough seas. HMS Princess Maud laid mines under enemy air observation on the 12th of March 1940. German reconnaissance aircraft photographed her twice during the operation. Her crew, following standing orders, didn't take evasive action or increase speed. They continued their mine-laying operation whilst being photographed. The German aircraft report classified her as transport low military value and recommended no strike. At the time of observation, she was 60% through deploying 180 mines. The Luftwaffe watched her do it and didn't recognise what they were seeing. Standard German mine-layer crew training required 14 months of specialised instruction. British ferry conversions were crewed by merchant sailors, given a 72-hour briefing. This sounds like disaster waiting to happen. German naval theorists assumed British mine warfare effectiveness would be correspondingly terrible. The opposite proved true, for a perfectly logical reason. The merchant crews already knew these ships intimately. Lieutenant William Cartwright, commanding HMS Hythe, wrote in his April 1940 report, "Chief engineer served on Hythe for 7 years before conversion, knows every pipe, valve and quirk. More valuable than a naval engineer with textbook knowledge of theoretical specifications. Ship develops a knock in the starboard reduction gear at sustained speeds above 13 knots. Chief knows to drop to 11.5 knots before the bearing overheats. Manual doesn't mention this, experience does." German crews trained on standardized vessels with predictable characteristics. British crews operated ships they'd lived with for years, ships with individual personalities and particular quirks. When HMS Manxman lost her wireless on a February 1940 sortie, the crew completed the mission using the commercial ship-to-ship lamp system they'd used before the war. German protocol would have required mission abort. The British crew reverted to their civilian experience and carried on. The inadequate training was actually superior institutional knowledge. The Royal Navy wasn't trying to turn merchant sailors into naval specialists. They were using merchant sailors' existing expertise in the exact vessels being operated. The mines were new, the ships weren't. On the 21st of October 1939, German S-boats, fast attack craft, attempted a raid on British convoy traffic in the Downs, the shallow waters between the English coast and the Goodwin Sands. German naval intelligence had marked these waters as clear, no minefields charted, no defensive barriers noted. 3 S-boats, S-19, S-20 and S-21, entered at high speed, confident in their intelligence. They were entering a field laid by HMS Mona's Queen 4 days earlier. The converted ferry had deployed 220 mines in a pattern designed specifically to create a safe corridor for British shipping, whilst blocking high-speed approaches from the east. German charts showed open water. British ferries had rewritten reality. S-19 struck a mine at 0142 hours, breaking her back. She sank in 40 seconds. S-20, attempting evasive manoeuvres, struck a second mine at 0144, blowing off her stern. S-21 reversed course at emergency speed and escaped, but reported in her log, waters completely blocked, extensive minefield, return route uncertain. The German flotilla commander's report noted, British defensive mining more extensive than intelligence indicated. Waters previously considered clear are heavily defended. British intelligence intercepted and decoded this report. The assessment made them smile. HMS Mona's Queen had laid exactly one minefield, 4 days old. German intelligence was now assuming extensive defensive barriers existed throughout the Downs. In reality, most of the waters remained clear, but German forces no longer trusted their charts. The psychological effect of one ferry's work paralysed German fast attack operations in the Downs for 3 months. Defensive mining was one thing. German doctrine expected Britain to protect her coasts. What German naval planning never anticipated was how effectively these inadequate civilian conversions would conduct offensive mining. HMS Princess Victoria laid offensive fields off the German-occupied Danish coast in April 1940. Deep in waters Germany considered secured. Her profile, a modest passenger ferry, allowed her to operate in areas where a military vessel would have triggered immediate response. On the night of the 15th of April, she deployed 180 mines along the Skagen shipping lane, the primary route for Swedish iron ore vessels heading to German ports. The genius was in the targeting. Rather than blocking the entire lane, which would be immediately noticed, Princess Victoria laid a sparse field covering only the deep water channel, where heavily laden ore carriers would transit. Lighter vessels in ballast could pass through shallower waters safely. The Germans noticed ships were sinking, but couldn't identify a pattern that indicated mining. 3 ore carriers went down in 12 days. German charts still showed those waters as clear. The German Naval War Staff diary entry for the 28th of April 1940 records: continuing losses in Skagen approaches remain unexplained. Possible torpedo attacks from unidentified submarine. Recommend increased air patrols. They never considered mines because no mine layer had been observed. No warship had been detected. Just passenger ferries doing whatever passenger ferries do. The entry was wrong on every count. It wasn't torpedoes, it wasn't submarines. It was mines laid by a ferry that German reconnaissance had photographed 3 times and dismissed as civilian traffic. By June 1940, German naval intelligence had documented anomalous mining in 17 separate zones. The reports are studies in confusion. Mines kept appearing in areas where no mine layers had been observed. Fields materialized overnight in supposedly secure waters. The pattern made no sense within German operational assumptions. In July 1940, Kriegsmarine Intelligence issued a revised assessment of British mine-laying capacity. The report concluded Britain must be using submarines for offensive mining. It was the only explanation for mines appearing without mine layers being detected. The report recommended increased anti-submarine patrols in mine-affected areas and better sonar coverage of coastal approaches. This was precisely backwards. British submarines did conduct some mining operations, but the vast majority of offensive fields were laid by surface vessels, the converted ferries. German intelligence couldn't accept what their own observation showed: civilian-looking ferries laying mines in broad daylight. It contradicted doctrine too fundamentally, so they invented an explanation that fit their expectations rather than accepting what was actually happening. The misidentification became operationally crippling. German forces devoted extensive resources to anti-submarine measures in areas where surface mine layers operated freely. HMS Lochinvar conducted 4 mine-laying operations in July 1940 in waters under intense German anti-submarine patrol. German forces detected nothing because they were searching for submarines whilst a ferry steamed past. The effectiveness wasn't measured just in ships sunk, it was measured in psychological disruption. By August 1940, German merchant captains were reporting widespread anxiety about British mining. Captains no longer trusted their charts. Safe passages used for months suddenly became suspect. Transit times increased as vessels took circuitous routes around suspected fields. A captured German merchant captain, interrogated in September 1940 after his ship struck a mine off the Dutch coast, provided particularly revealing testimony. We followed the cleared lane exactly as charted. Naval authorities assured us the route was swept daily. We maintained proper spacing from other vessels. Every protocol was observed. The mine appeared in waters guaranteed safe. If cleared lanes are mined, nowhere is secure. The British can mine anywhere without detection. He was describing operational success of a staggering magnitude. The Royal Navy had achieved strategic impact not just through ships sunk, but through credibility destroyed. German charts became worthless. Cleared lanes became suspect. The psychological weight of omnipresent threat slowed German shipping as effectively as actual mines, and the weapon creating this effect remained invisible. German intelligence reports from late 1940s still hadn't identified the converted ferries as mine layers. The reports noted increased British mining activity. They documented unexplained fields. They recommended countermeasures against submarines and fast mine layers. They never mentioned ferries. What made the ferry conversions more effective than purpose-built mine layers was precisely what made them look inadequate. The simplicity was the sophistication. Consider deployment procedures. A German mine layer like Kaiser required bridge crew maintaining precise speed, plus or minus 0.5 knots, plotting room calculating positions continuously, wireless communication for coordination, hydraulic systems functioning at pressure, electrical systems stable throughout operation, crew of 180, coordinating actions, escort vessels for protection, high speed to reach deployment zones. A converted ferry like HMS Minster required, one officer on the bridge with a stopwatch, 4 ratings at the stern with levers, 1 engineer maintaining basic propulsion, manual signals for timing. No escorts appeared civilian. Low speed appeared non-military. Total radio silence standard practice. The German system was impressive in perfect conditions. The British system functioned when everything had gone wrong, and naval operations invariably involved things going wrong. HMS Killarney laid mines in January 1940 with her wireless smashed by storm damage, her compass showing erratic readings, and her captain navigating by dead reckoning and pre-war knowledge of the coastline. The field was deployed within 200 yards of the planned position. 4 German vessels struck mines in that field over the following 6 weeks. German reports noted the field's position and assumed it had been laid by a sophisticated vessel with advanced navigation equipment. It had been laid by a ferry captain who'd run that route for 12 years before the war and recognised headlands in the darkness. The deepest irony is that British doctrine didn't initially conceive this as deception. The ferry conversions were, genuinely, an improvised response to shortage of purpose-built mine layers. The Royal Navy needed mine-laying capacity immediately and converted what was available. The civilian appearance was preserved partly by speed. There wasn't time for extensive modification, and partly by economy. Why spend resources on cosmetic changes? The deceptive effect emerged organically from practical constraints. Only later did British naval intelligence realise what they'd accidentally created: a fleet of warships that enemy reconnaissance couldn't recognise as warships. By early 1940, the preservation of civilian appearance became deliberate policy. Converted vessels were instructed to maintain their original profiles. New conversions were specifically selected for unremarkable silhouettes. The accidental deception evolved into intentional strategy. Commander Ralph Fisher, coordinating mine-laying operations from Portsmouth, wrote in March 1940, "The enemy's inability to identify our converted vessels is proving more valuable than any technical capability we might gain from obvious military modification. A mine layer that appears to be a warship will be attacked or avoided. A mine layer that appears to be a ferry will be ignored. We are weaponizing the enemy's assumptions." This represented a profound shift in naval thinking. Traditional doctrine held that warships should look like warships. It intimidated enemies and signalled capability. The ferry conversions inverted this. The less they looked like warships, the more effective they became. Weakness was strength. Simplicity was sophistication. invisibility was the most powerful weapon system. By May 1940, the cumulative effect of ferry-laid mines had altered German naval operations fundamentally. The Kriegsmarine modified routing protocols, extended transit times, allocated scarce minesweepers to continuous clearing operations, and most significantly, restricted operations in entire zones due to suspected British mining. German naval operations orders from May 1940 list 23 coastal areas as suspected heavy mining, avoid unless operationally critical. Of these 23 areas, 19 contained no mines whatsoever. British ferries had created phantom minefields through the simple act of being unpredictable and undetectable. The Germans couldn't distinguish between actually mined waters and potentially mined waters, so they avoided both equally. The iron ore traffic from Sweden, critical to German steel production, was disrupted repeatedly despite the physical mines sunk, accounting for only a small percentage of the route. The psychological effect, the uncertainty, the distrust of charts, these achieved what physical barriers never could have. German shipping didn't need to hit mines to be disrupted. It merely needed to believe mines might be present. The success of the ferry conversions taught British naval planning a lesson that would be applied throughout the war. Sophisticated capability matters less than operational effectiveness. Apparent simplicity can mask profound strategic impact. The enemy's expectations are a weapon system waiting to be exploited. The program eventually converted 49 civilian vessels into auxiliary minelayers, laying a combined total of 87,650 mines by the end of 1940. These improvised conversions, crewed by merchant sailors and operated with manual equipment, accounted for 64% of all mines laid by British forces in 1940. They sank 263 confirmed German vessels and damaged 187 more. Not a single converted ferry was sunk by enemy action during this period. They remained effectively invisible to German forces targeting legitimate military vessels. The purpose-built minelayers HMS Adventure and HMS Abdeel, magnificent vessels with sophisticated equipment and naval-trained crews, laid 12,400 mines combined in 1940. They were observed, targeted, and had to operate with heavy escort protection. Their operations were constrained by their visibility as military assets. The ferries, ignored and unremarked, laid 7 times as many mines whilst moving through enemy-controlled waters as casually as if they were still running peacetime routes. The ferry mine layer program exposed a fundamental flaw in naval planning across all nations: the assumption that superior technology and obvious military capability would dominate. German theorists built magnificent vessels and assumed their sophistication guaranteed effectiveness. They were wrong about what effectiveness actually required. In naval warfare, the most powerful weapon is often the one your enemy doesn't recognize as a weapon. The most effective platform is the one that doesn't trigger defensive responses. The best crew training is sometimes the experience gained through years of civilian service on the same vessels. Britain's ferry conversion succeeded because they looked exactly like what they had been: civilian vessels doing civilian things in civilian ways. German naval doctrine had no category for passenger ferry conducting systematic mine warfare. So German forces saw passenger ferries and concluded they were observing civilian traffic. Their reconnaissance was accurate. They correctly identified the vessel's origins and civilian design. Their analysis was completely wrong. They failed to understand that civilian origins were the disguise, not the limitation. HMS Mona's Queen, HMS Princess Victoria, HMS Lochinvar, and 36 other converted ferries achieved strategic impact disproportionate to their modest specifications, precisely because those specifications were modest. They looked inadequate. They appeared improvised. They seemed like desperate measures taken by a navy short of proper vessels. They were, in fact, one of the most effective naval weapon systems deployed in the early war, and they worked specifically because they didn't look like weapon systems at all. German naval intelligence files captured in 1945 contain reconnaissance photographs of converted British mine layers. The photographs are marked with classifications: civilian ferry, transport vessel, hospital ship probable. The vessels in the photographs were, at the time of observation, conducting active mine-laying operations. German analysts looked directly at British mine layers and saw ferries. They had all the evidence. They reached completely wrong conclusions. That failure of recognition, more than any technical specification or tactical innovation, explains why Britain's improvised ferry conversions achieved what purpose-built warships could not. The Germans were looking for warships. Britain sent them ferries. The ferries won.